Appreciate it. Craig, thank you so much, and thank you for what U.S. Bank does in Kentucky. You have a proud tradition of community service that traces to all your market areas and people like Bill Jones. The Chamber is much stronger because of your commitment to Kentucky, as is the state. You know, I agree with him that we've had some great programs here at the Summit. There was one major flaw. Somebody booked me after Eric. Somebody's going to pay a price for that one. And I stand between you and a nice lunch with an incredible Kentucky success story, Kent Taylor, and Texas Roadhouse. That's going to be exciting to hear him. But let's just take a few minutes here and talk about all of what we've heard, not all of what we've heard, but to try to synthesize that. We've heard a bunch. Maybe you're in brain overload right now. But what does this mean for Kentucky? How does Kentucky move forward? And so I'm going to suggest a possibility for that. Our chamber has been working hard the last half of 18 or first part of 19 on thinking about the future of Kentucky and putting some of that into some plans. And so I'd like to talk about that today for just a few minutes and talk about how we get to a brighter future for Kentucky. So I'm going to call this a 12-step program. What do you think of when you hear a 12-step program? Recovery, right? Well, usually it's associated with AA. This 12-step program's associated with DA. Dave, that's pretty lame. But what I'm going to do is take several things the Chamber's been working on and work it into a program of things that we need to move forward. And I think you can identify with this on your local level and perhaps at a state level. We produced this last year, you've got a copy of it here in front of you, the 4 Pillars for Prosperity. This is a strategic plan not for the Kentucky Chamber, but for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We put it out there intentionally because the governor's race is in play this year, and we wanted the gubernatorial candidates to respond to this. What do you think? And by the way, what's your vision for Kentucky? And it revolves around making Kentucky more competitive. Now, there's a bunch of stuff beyond just the 4 pillars. There are what we call building blocks. There are metrics that are suggested in there as to how we measure our progress in these 4 areas. And also online at our chamber website, kychamber.com, is a dashboard where we routinely update statistics about Kentucky and how we're doing with those metrics. So the 4 pillars are a healthy, educated, and skilled workforce. We've heard a ton about that in this summit. It's pervasive, it's big employers, little employers, it's everybody. Quality, knowledge-based jobs. Clearly, we not only need to create jobs to grow our economy, but we need to be focusing on knowledge-based jobs because that's where the present is and certainly where the future is going to be. 21st century infrastructure. I'll get into that in just a little bit. Effective and efficient government, both at the state level and at the local level. So those are the 4 pillars. A lot of stuff in the report there, even more online. So I'm going to structure the 12 steps based on this basic structure. A healthy and educated workforce, that's the first one, and that was just a no-brainer. We put together a few years ago a business education roundtable. And these folks have been meeting quarterly. They've been talking about how do we improve our educational systems to produce the workforce that we need, thinking past a governor, thinking past a chamber guy, thinking at least a decade into the future. Will James actually proposed this back when he was president of Toyota, before Susan was, and when he was chairman of our chamber. So we put together a group of people that are basically the 6 or 7 top education leaders in the state and some industry sector leaders from manufacturing, logistics, healthcare, construction, and business services to match with them, and these folks have been working for a couple years. We've been facilitated by Ted Abernathy. Some of you have heard him at this summit before in previous years. He's from Research Triangle, a brilliant economic futurist, I guess I would call him. And then Diana Taylor in Frankfurt with Taylor Gray Associates helping us. And we've been supported with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So this group produced a report called Striving to be Top Tier for Talent. In other words, a 10-year look at how do we produce the talent that we need in this state. Number one goal of theirs was to invest in preschool. That's step number one. And this wasn't just child care advocates saying this. This was corporate executives like Will James advocating that we've got to invest early. The research is clear. You can make a difference early rather than trying to repair damage later. Step two, reinvent high school. What does that mean? Well, to an employer, if somebody walks in and says, hire me, I've got a high school diploma, what does that mean? That you attended high school for 4 years? We need to reinvent high school in a way that a diploma actually means something and defines the skill set, that your unique skill set for the employer. We're very supportive of our K-12 system, but we've got to make those diplomas relevant to the employer community. Number three, and this is kind of a higher education goal, but it's not stated as let's put money into higher institutions or let's build more buildings, let's create more law schools or whatever. It says ensure every adult obtains a marketable degree or credential. Now it takes resources to do that. Our universities need funding to do that. Credentials are becoming much, much more important. We did a look across the state at what kind of credentials industries are paying attention to, and it's almost an infinite number. It's certainly hundreds of credentials. So knowing what credentials are relevant to the employers in your community is important for a high school and a tech school and a community college and a university. What are the credentials? Those are increasingly important. Not that degrees aren't, degrees are too, but credentials are growing in relative importance. So that's step number three. Step number four is aimed right at the business community. Engage employers to define the needed skills and develop talent supply chains. What does that mean? Manufacturers especially have made a science out of supply chain management. In other words, at Susan's plant in Georgetown, their computers are talking to computers in Bardstown, in Tennessee, in Mississippi, in Mexico, saying we need X number of parts on the back dock next Tuesday at 11:03. Their computers are getting the supply chain to make a Toyota Camry or a Lexus in Georgetown, Kentucky. Well, more and more employers are looking at their talent supply the same way. Who do we have in high school? What are their aptitudes? What are their interests? How can we train them? How can we give them work-study programs? How can we get them into a technical program so that they arrive at our plant trained and ready and interested in a career that pays a good wage? So talent pipeline management, TPM, you'll be hearing a lot about that in the years ahead. That's kind of the science of employers thinking about their talent supply just like they do their commodity supplies. Step number five, we said we wanted to create quality, knowledge-based jobs. We need to work to enhance Kentucky's business environment. It's not just the tax structure and the regulatory environment, all of which need constant attention. You don't just have one legislative session in Frankfurt and fix things. Constantly things are changing, things have to be tweaked and reformed. Parentheses, especially legal reform. Kentucky is not a healthy environment to do business in terms of getting sued. Now, to be fair, there aren't that many zillion-dollar judgments by juries. There are a handful each year where you look up in a hospital or a nursing home's been, gotten a $20 million judgment by a jury. The problem is that every time there is one of those, it makes all of us in this room want to settle before, if there's a complaint against our company that has merit or doesn't have merit, our insurance carriers probably tell, hey, you better settle. I don't think you want to go before a jury. And that creates your insurance rates at a higher level, and Kentucky continues to rank pretty low in terms of our legal environment. That's a whole nother presentation for another day, but it does need significant attention. So step number five, work to enhance our business climate. Step number six, work to enhance the entrepreneurial ecosystem. There are some things that can be done in Frankfurt by a governor, by a legislature, but a lot of this is at the local level where you encourage entrepreneurs. You look around and say, are we assisting them? Are we celebrating them? Are we recognizing them at the chamber dinner, for example, for creating jobs in our community? Are we offering the access to capital that they need? Have we put together a venture capital pool? Those kinds of issues. There are a lot of things that have to be done, but these, the largest employer in your community 20 years from now might be somebody that's out in their garage this morning working on some tools and working through some software and trying to come up with a new plan that will become a company someday and employ your kids and grandkids. Number 7, modernize the state's road fund. This is under infrastructure. We had a bill this last time, it didn't pass. We'll go at it again. There have been some mentions of that in these programs, but our state gas tax is not sufficient to keep up with our highway and bridge infrastructure. Why? We're all driving more fuel-efficient cars. Some people are driving electric cars, and because the road fund is fueled, so to speak, by a gas tax, some people don't have to pay in to help repair our roads. So it needs to be modernized. And you heard Governor Bevin being very frank about that this morning during a campaign year, saying that, yes, we need that. Everybody seems to be for it, we just can't get it through the legislature yet. We need to invest in our central location. That's an advantage that nobody can take from us. We're in the middle of 2/3 of the U.S. population. What does that mean? Did you hear General Kelly last night talk about how many times he had been through Kentucky? I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of people moving through this state every day. Somebody from northern Kentucky mentioned to me that 4% of the nation's GDP crosses the Brent Spence Bridge on I-75 every day, going through our state. We're sitting here in the middle of all that. There's a reason UPS is in Louisville. There's a reason Amazon chose the CVG Cincinnati Northern Kentucky Airport. It's because of our location relative to decent weather. The runways aren't iced up every other day, yet we're close to the northern population. So FedEx, you look at where DHL, FedEx, UPS, there's a reason they're located there. It's our central location. Think about what it means for tourism. I talked about the Bourbon Trail a while ago and how accessible it is within one day's drive for a lot of people. And yet here in Kentucky, we don't have a destination resort. Think about that. That's just kind of, in my view, it's just a huge vacancy. We don't have a French Lick. We certainly don't have a Greenbrier. We don't have a Biltmore, Blackberry Farm. And we're sitting in the middle of all that. So why wouldn't we have a nice destination resort? There are implications for industry, implications for logistics, implications for tourism, and of course implications for our infrastructure too. Step 9, invest in broadband. You've probably read some of the controversy about Kentucky Wired, the effort to put broadband into rural areas. They're getting back on course from what I understand. Interesting challenge there. But our providers like AT&T are part of all that as we try to get broadband to a greater percentage of people, because how do you do business these days from your home or your office or your medical clinic or your hospital without decent high-speed broadband? Number 10, fix the pension problem. The governor mentioned it this morning. We've talked about it since 2006 when we noticed that the pension situation was on the wrong track, and that was before the recession. We had trouble, frankly, getting much attention in Frankfort back then. Now it's a singular issue that's still staring at us. Some progress has been made. The 2013 bill was huge, but not enough, and there's more to be done. That's another topic for another day. But in terms of effective and efficient government, that's the big cloud that hangs over Frankfort right now. The pension problem is still something we've got to work out of for a generation. On the local level, in terms of efficient and effective government, you know, I hear it sometimes in circles like this where we're all talking about the future of the state, you'll hear somebody say, "Boy, I wish we could get rid of some of these counties. We've got too many counties. It's very inefficient." Agreed. However, I would say they're not going away. In our lifetimes, we're not going to see 120 counties merge. When you hear somebody in downtown Louisville talk about counties merging, they have some vague notion that those counties like 100 miles away should merge. It's not Oldham and Jefferson, I guarantee you, or Bullitt and Jefferson. I use this analogy, maybe you can relate to it. If you went into a town and there was a Methodist church, Catholic church, Presbyterian Baptist right on the same corner, and you say, wait a minute, y'all are all in the same business. Why don't you get together? You could save so much money on hymnals. It ain't going to happen. It's too much tradition. It's personal. And just with counties, yeah, it's political. There are these fiefdoms out there. It's political, but it's also Friday night football. It's a culture of identifying with counties. So what do we do about that? Do we just say, oh, okay, we got 120 counties, nothing to do? No, I think there's tremendous possibility for merging and consolidating services. Get 3 counties to buy an ambulance together or to hire a jailer together. So some of us are talking about, what if we put together a fund in Kentucky in which counties or libraries or cities or special districts, water districts, could get together and apply to that fund for technical assistance. It might be an engineering firm you need to hire. You might need to hire Deloitte or one of the consulting firms to come in and help you analyze what would it take if our water systems were together and managed together. We need to encourage functional effectiveness, possibly through consolidation or just maybe through mutual contracts and things. So, step number 11, incentivize local governments toward cooperation. The next one, I'm going to quote my chairman. This is called Playing to the Gallery. He chaired a committee last year as he was moving into the chairmanship of the chamber to create a strategic plan for our chamber. And so this number 12 it's directed straight at the business community, and it comes from our strategic plan. So let me read you a sentence here. The private business community cannot hold back and hope that competing political visions will somehow result in the Commonwealth progressing in areas that demand constant and vigorous attention in a 21st century global economy. In other words, if we relax and say, well, if Andy Beshear gets elected or if Matt Bevin gets elected, maybe things will happen and maybe somebody will fix this stuff. The private business community has to be engaged. Not that anybody said, okay, government go away, private business community will handle everything, but the private business community has to be able to take a long view and say, if you expect us to invest in this state, here are the types of things that we need. So it said the private business community cannot hold back. And then the second sentence is this one on the screen. The business community must articulate a vision for the Commonwealth and provide bold leadership to pursue that vision. And I asked Sawyer, she helped me with this PowerPoint, I asked her to come up with an image to illustrate the fact that nobody's going to, got ahead of myself here. Nobody's going to be able to articulate that vision if they have a bad case of laryngitis. This guy has laryngitis. When I came back to Kentucky after being in Birmingham for 5 years, 2005, I started asking some friends of mine, Bob Sexton at the Pritchard Committee, Jim Weissman at Toyota, some others. Has Kentucky made progress? How are we measuring that progress? Have we made progress in education since CARA was passed in 1990? And somebody made the comment at the time, said, well, the business community was heavily involved in that education reform back there, and the corporate titans of industry, like John Hall at Ashland Oil, Oz Nelson from UPS, David Jones from Humana, traveled the state. I remember picking them up at the airport in Owensboro when I was down there, and they came and made the case that we're 49th, we're not going to take it anymore, we've got to do something about education. So business was on the front end of education reform back then, but my friend was saying that the business community had developed a bad case of laryngitis and had kind of gone silent for a while. So for the business community to lay out a vision and to be bold going forward, we have got to be able to overcome that. But this image right here is the one that I asked Sawyer to put together, and that is that nobody is going to just flip a switch and suddenly Kentucky is going to make progress. A governor's race is not going to make Kentucky immediately have progress. I mean, it's important. Clearly it's important. We all agree on that. But it takes day-to-day effort. There are going to be some transformational events. I've questioned, a few years ago I did a little survey, just informal, completely unscientific. I wrote an email to about 50 people that I selected out of my email addresses. Journalists, some university presidents, some corporate business leaders. And I said, what events in your lifetime would you consider transformational in Kentucky? There were a variety of answers, but I added them up, and the 4 things that were kind of above the cutoff point that clearly there was significant agreement. One was that Toyota, located in the mid-'80s, and over 150 Japanese companies followed, along with domestic companies, clearly transformational for the state. UPS locating in Lexington. I remember waking up one morning in Owensboro reading the Courier-Journal front page, airport to buy several hundred homes for UPS to locate a world port in Louisville. And well over 150 companies have followed to be near UPS for the logistics advantages. The third one was CARA, the Education Reform of 1990. And the fourth one, interestingly, to me, was the 1997 higher education reform in which the community college system was created out from under UK. Those were the four transformational events that this loose group of 50 folks responded. And I thought about that. That's like one per decade, maybe. I mean, just averaged out. And if you go back, I would put something like in northern Kentucky, I would put the location of the Cincinnati airport on the Kentucky side of the river. Steve, I think you would agree that was transformational. That almost guaranteed that the economy of northern Kentucky would be robust for decades. So it's that type of thing. But my point is that that's not an everyday occurrence. That's maybe once every decade. We can all hope and pray for another one. We all work toward that. Maybe Brady will transform a certain part of Kentucky, but it's not an everyday occurrence. And so flipping a switch is not going to happen. Usually it takes what I use a term, aggressive incrementalism. In other words, it's incremental, and this is where Eric might take an exception with me on incrementalism, but driving every day. Some people in football world would call it blocking and tackling. Other people might call it shoulder to the wheel. Just staying after it day to day. It's taking a block and making a wall. Some of that can happen in Frankfort. I think most of it will happen at the local level, in your community. And although these 12 steps that I've laid out are broad themes, admittedly, but I think a test of leadership for state leaders and local leaders is to go back and say, okay, yeah, we need to do something about our workforce, and then develop a strategy, develop goals, develop objectives, and say, okay, tomorrow morning I'm going to do X. Tomorrow morning might be going to your church where you're in the class with the HR director from the local plant, and you say, by the way, how are you all interacting with your high school? What are your needs? Starting a conversation about workforce. It might be as simple as that. But the test of leadership is to take those broad themes and to make actionable items from it. Progress brick by brick. So for a brighter future in Kentucky, I think that's for all of us in this room to do in our local communities, in our own spheres. It might be in banking, manufacturing, community service organizations, nonprofits, but I think that's the test for us. When we talk about the success of Kentucky, Kentucky is a political designation. The borders were formed by politics and geography. But when we talk about progress in Kentucky, that's really just the collective, that's the summary, the sum total of all the progress at the city level, the county level, your school system level, your company level. So I wish you well as you all go back from this summit. Put some of these ideas from the other speakers, myself maybe, into action locally, and let's make it all work. Thank you. All right, sure.
A point of personal privilege, I would also like to thank Dave Adkisson for his partnership with KET on several workforce development programs we've done. And David's been on KET probably more than I have, and I hope I can still count on him every now and then in the future. He's been a staple on our program Kentucky Tonight, which, by the way, on Monday will have chamber representation as we talk about infrastructure. And Ashley Watts will be representing the chamber. So I hope you'll tune in Monday night at 8 Eastern for that. We have a little housekeeping note. If you lost this beautiful slate blue bracelet, please come see me at the front and we'll return that to you. I know it's probably hard for you to see in the very back, but if this looks like it might be yours or you want to claim it, we'll have it up at the front. All right, so now it's time to have some lunch. You're going to go upstairs and you'll have a great keynote address by Kent Taylor, as David mentioned earlier, and some food provided, the Kentucky Proud menu, so you can't go wrong. So we're going to meet immediately upstairs and then you will be served upon your arrival.